We're going to start with some opening remarks from both our board directors. We have Sam here as well as Aimee Ng. And then we'll have a presentation by Medina Ali Hassan and Bashar Al-Tafif, both from Oakland International High School Wellness Center. And then we'll have some presentations by Lisa Grant Dawson, who is the Chief Business Officer for Oakland Unified, as well as Sandra Aguilera, who is the Chief Academic Officer. After that, we'll get into some small breakout rooms that will be facilitated and note taked, and then we'll come back for Q&A announcements. Okay. So I will turn it over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thanks for your help facilitating the meeting. So I'm Sam Davis. I'm the school board director for District 1. I just want to welcome everybody tonight. Really appreciate you coming. Like I said, so close to the end of the year, but still being involved and keeping track of what's going on in our district. This is Teacher Appreciation Week, so just a big shout out to all the teachers, especially the ones who are here tonight after a long year and a long day of teaching. It's amazing what teachers how they've just transformed their trade this year and are learning how to be distance learning instructors and just using all the platforms and all the techniques to reach our students. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. And now also a lot of them are doing in-person instruction on top of that. So it's a huge lift for this year. So we have just had, a year that's been challenging like no other year, and it's been really intense. As a parent, I've experienced it. I know our staff have experienced it that way. Our students have really struggled to connect to their learning. And so we have a huge opportunity next year because we do have really substantial relief funds. And yet we know that students are going to be coming back facing tremendous challenges, having been away from the classroom, many of them for a year and a half, trying to adapt. And so the danger here really is not, as President Biden was saying when he was passing the relief bill, it's not that we are thinking too big, but actually that we're not thinking big enough, because there's so much that we will need to do and that we can do, and that these relief funds give us the opportunity to do. And so we really need to take that opportunity. So, and it's going to look really different at different schools, whether students are not showing up at all because we need to track them down and figure out, is it social emotional, is it practical, is it a family issue, or they are showing up and they're presenting with behavior issues, or they're presenting as really withdrawn, and we have to help them address the trauma that they experienced over this past year, whether it's isolation or it's having lost family members, or there's been so many challenges that people have had to deal with this past year. And or students might be showing up and they might be just struggling academically and needing a lot of support. And so the teams of people at school sites are going to need to be really flexible, because it might be all of those issues, or it might show up differently at different school sites. We have really diverse schools in Oakland. And so we're just going to need to have really flexible teams based at school sites so that, school leadership can deploy people differently depending on the needs of the site. And yet the teams are also going to need coaching and professional development from the central level. And there's going to need to be an opportunity for teams to share their best practices with each other, share their strategies that are successful periodically throughout the year. So this is, a huge planning effort. It's really exciting to see how people are thinking about these challenges and how we do actually have the resources to address them. They are one-time funds. And so, that's the dilemma. We can hire people up, we can really staff our schools well for next year, but then those funds are going to dry up. And so we need to also have a strategy for, a pipeline to help some of the new people that are coming in, so that we can train the teachers of tomorrow, or the school staff of tomorrow, as we transition folks into long-term roles. So it's a huge opportunity, and I want to really thank Director Ng for joining us as well. She got this wonderful resolution passed last week. I will let her talk about it. And so without any further ado, I'll pass it to Director Ng. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice President Davis. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome all of you. Thank you for taking the time on your Thursday evening to learn more about how you can be advocating for your school communities around the budget process and providing your feedback and input as we consider how we want to best spend our one-time funds to invest in our student academic and social emotional needs. As Vice President Davis said, over the course of this I want to say last 5 months or so, I've been working with Student Director Jessica Ramos, who is just an absolute amazing leader here in Oakland, probably a future school board member and mayor as well. She's out of town tonight. Otherwise, I would have hoped she could join us. But she is a senior at Skyline High School and really passionate about addressing student mental health needs. Over the course of this past year, just really lifting up the challenges that she's felt personally, as well as those of her peers as well. And so really was motivated to work on a resolution around how we can best support and address our youth social, emotional, and mental health needs, not just obviously in the return to in-person learning, and especially after the compounding traumas of the last year, but also on an ongoing basis, how we can build a culture of belonging and community in our schools that are based on relationships. Sorry for our background orchestra here with dogs and 1.5-year-olds. In any case, had a wonderful opportunity to work with her, as well as partner with families and youth from across the city I see some Faith in Action leaders here. They were really helpful in helping to advocate for the efforts of young folks, as well as Californians for Justice, who helps really support and lift up youth voice in the process as well. And so we were able to unanimously pass a resolution last Wednesday, as well as think through different efforts about how we can be in our expanded learning plans, investing one-time dollars to help support restorative restart to our schools beginning next year. And so we were able to direct the superintendent to invest $9 million in the expanded learning plan, of which you'll hear more about today. So in any case, really had a great opportunity to partner with youth and family, and to make sure that we can be addressing our social, emotional, and mental health needs of our young folks, not just next year, but going forward, really help to transform our schools based on trusting and relationships. So I really want to thank you again, Vice President Davis, for this opportunity, and encourage folks to weigh in on what this could mean for you and your school sites, and what you could envision with your experiences of how this support could be used.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Director Ng. And I think we all get get what it means to be working from home. So next, we're going to turn over to some folks from International High School, Oakland International Wellness Center. So we have Medina Ali, the Wellness Center Director, and a student, Bashar, who's a senior and wellness ambassador. So I'll invite you guys to unmute yourselves. And
thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share my experiences as the community school manager, and also share that I just transitioned into this role. So I've been a teacher at Oakland International for over 6 years now. And so moving into this role has been really an honor, and I'm excited to share like the things that we've been doing. And one of the things that I said prior to taking on this role is I really don't feel like I could have continued teaching at Oakland International High School had we not have had a wellness center and all the services that were being provided. And that I've said that every year that I've worked there. And part of that is that there's so many services that students need outside of academics to really have them thriving in the classroom. And since the pandemic, we're seeing more and more that our newcomers are amongst the most hardest hit because of the pandemic. We have students that are forced to work because they need to provide for their families. They were already working before, but now they're working full time and trying to figure out how to balance school and work. So some of the things that the Wellness Center provides at our school is we're supporting students with food insecurity. So besides the OUSD food bank, we have an on-site food bank. And so on Wednesdays, we have families coming on site to pick up food. And then on Fridays, we saw a need to do deliveries to families. And this is fresh produce, not like the pre-made things that that the district is offering to families. So like we're taking families boxes of food every Friday. So we deliver about over 70 boxes of food, fresh produce and canned goods every week to families. So that's one of the coordinated efforts that our Wellness Center is doing. A lot of the other things that we're doing is supporting families around housing insecurity. We saw a great uptick in families being really worried about being evicted and not really understanding the laws and what their rights were. And even when we explained it and did workshops around it, there was still a lot of anxiety and fear. So it was a lot of like knocking on doors, talking to families, home visits to really explain and connecting families with organizations to better support them around housing insecurity. Other things that we've been doing is, I think similar to many other wellness centers, is supporting families with applying for social services like Medi-Cal. We're supporting families with legal, since our students, the majority of our students, right, all of them are newcomers, there is a high percentage that are in need of legal support. So we're directing them to the organizations that are supporting them with those legal services. Really, our Wellness Center has become a place that has tethered students to school. We are seeing that students need all these services just to be fully aware and recognized and taken care of to even engage with academics. And had we not had these services on site, we had so many students that were disengaged, and for good reason, right? Like they're isolated, they're newcomers, they're learning a new language from a computer screen, right? And it's challenging. And even before the pandemic, it was already challenging having students working and all the other things that they're coming with, right? That they need support around. And so the Wellness Center has always been a hub of like a support for students, and they knew where to go. And even during the pandemic, we had families coming to site asking for support. And that's where we decided to create a food bank, right? Is the support that was being asked for. We're fortunate at Oakland International that we have some amazing people that have written grants for us to have some extra funding for that. But really, should be something that is all across our schools, right? All schools should have a space for students to get these supports. And I know that like funding is drying up, and now we have this great opportunity, right, that to better support families, and we want to make sure that that money is going in the right direction. And yeah, I would say like we had to create an engagement team just to within our wellness. Like our Wellness Center is not just doing the kind of case management part, but they're also doing the kind of legwork and going and doing the home visits for students that are disengaged around attendance. They're also knocking on doors and explaining like where can you go to get a vaccination if you want one, or how to stay safe. So some of the things that they're not really translating really well kind of through the media and the fear that our families are having, we're doing that work to support them. And they feel a lot of trust because a lot of the people that work in our Wellness Center actually come from the community. So I think one of the things that I really appreciate about our school is that our administration has really made an intentional effort to recruit people from the community to support with case management, working in the food bank, and supporting our students and families. And we have like students who are that have high bandwidth, right? So we saw a lot of our students that were doing really well, their families were doing well, that wanted to support. So we created this kind of revised version of leadership, which is called the Wellness Ambassadors. And what they did is they came up with ideas that how to better engage students and better support students to be more engaged, and how to connect with students so that they feel like they're being heard during this pandemic time. And Bashar is going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So yeah, I would say that we have case managers. The case managers are working tirelessly. Teachers are doing case management themselves and passing along what they don't have bandwidth for. And that's where we come in to support with more high leverage case management and supports. And I think I'll pass it over to Bashar to tell a little more about his perspective from a student. Bashar is actually a 12th grader at our school and going to UCLA next year, which I'm very proud of. And he's been a wellness ambassador for the last 3 years. And this year has been really an integral part of that committee of students. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Bashar.
Really quick, Bashar, before you start, I do want to, interpretation is happening, so I want to make sure it's all good. Andres, if you want to give me a thumbs up. And then also just to remind the speakers, I guess he can't turn his camera on, to speak slowly for interpretation. Oh, Andres gave me this thumbs up. Okay, thanks so much. Okay, Bashar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bashar, and I am a senior at Oakland International High School. I've been a part of the Wellness Ambassador team for the past 3 years. I was kind of involved in it the first year, my freshman year, but I wasn't too involved because it was just my first year of high school. I feel like the Wellness Center has been one of the best places in our school. Like, you have classes, and then for academics, and then whenever you want to do anything else besides academics, you have the wellness center. Say, for example, a student needs to take a break from class, they're tired, they feel like they just need a break, they can't continue anymore. You would go to the wellness center, they have tea over there, they have some snacks, you can just go take a break, sit down, lay down sometimes in a room by yourself for like 5-10 minutes, or how long you need, and then after that you return back to class for ready again. A lot of the wellness center does help with a lot of other things too. So like Miss Medina mentioned, they do have help for students who need help with legal cases, who need help with medical cases, who need help with, for example, like basic living things they need to survive. So, for example, food bank, like Miss Medina mentioned, we do have a food bank that is from the school every Monday, every Wednesday, and Friday. And I used to help with that before everything had to get shut down again. Yeah, and besides that, it's not just helping with these things, they help with everything. So outside of the academics, anything you have questions about, you would go to the wellness center and ask them. Say, for example, you're having a problem with something at home, you would go to the wellness center, they'd be able to help you. And it's just overall a really good place to be, a really good place thing to have at every school in Oakland. I feel like students benefit a lot from the wellness center.
Yeah, and I also would add that, like, one of the things that's been the hardest this year for our wellness center is really engaging our students in therapy. And part of that is the distance learning is challenging. And so a lot of our students are coming with, they have traumas from their own experiences, or they're dealing with isolation and depression. And in the past, right, at our school, it was very easy. We have therapists on site that would come to the classroom, check in with the students. But being that we're in this kind of new space, it's been really challenging. And so it's been a lot of really getting a hold of students, really connecting, even going to their homes, setting up a time to walk to the park so that they could be face to face with another person and have the space to really share how they're feeling and what they're dealing with. And that's been the greatest challenge. And we don't anticipate that just changing because school opens back up, right? Like, students are going to come back on site, and they've experienced this thing for about a year and a half, right? Or a year of pandemic. And now they're going to have to like re-engage. And so we don't want to like disregard that this year had happened. And I would say, like, I really appreciate that in the resolution, there was like a consideration of teachers, because I think teachers as well, this was a very challenging year for teachers, and them navigating what they went through in this pandemic. I think that's really important to better support our students moving forward.
Thank you so much. As I have a first grader, just curious, our wellness center is something that all high schools have? I don't know if you know that, or someone on the call does.
It was my first experience to have, like, with a wellness center coming to Oakland International High School. I think that there's maybe a lot, in many schools, there's a person that's similar to myself on site, but I think it, depending on which school and the funding that school has, grant funding or whoever is supporting, it might be a little more robust in one space. And then I think there's a lot of schools that don't have a wellness center, but I'm not sure. I don't really have the data around that, but I know that it was my first experience at Oakland International to have a wellness center with case managers that are going to help me with all these other things that I wouldn't normally have to go figure out on my own.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. And again, congrats, Bashar. That's amazing. UCLA is my dream school. I did not get in, but I'm going to go with you vicariously. Okay, up next, I'm going to invite Lisa Grant Dawson, our Chief Business Officer. And we have some framing questions here. What resources has Oakland already received? And how have we spent them? What funding is on its way, and what are the restrictions on how it is allocated? And how will we track how these funds are spent to make sure they are used in an equitable way that supports students from groups that have historically been underserved or unserved in our district?
Well, thank you so much, Caitlin, for that introduction. And actually, if we can go to the next slide, Vice President Davis, is it you or is it Caitlin that has mouse control? If you can partner with me as I speak,
Sure.
since this is a financial slide, it may be helpful for our viewers. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share with you. My name is Lisa Grant Dawson, and I am the district's Chief Business Officer. I work along with several incredible people to not only support the district in our what was normal functions as it relates to our finances and operations, but now what we're embracing as developing new normal to include the support with these resources. And so I'm going to answer the questions as we go through the slide. So we look at what funds have we received. We received a variety and are receiving different funds that have been communicated to us. So the first resource is actually on the fourth row, ESSER 1. So last year, when we were adopting our budget, last year when we were adopting our budget, we knew that we were receiving the ESSER 1 funds, and ESSER, California likes acronyms. And so we've spelled it out for you. It's the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. And so those funds we included in our budget, and that was $14.5 million. Now, we hadn't at that time determined how those resources were going to be spent. But during that same period of time of budget adoption, we were facing a negative 10% factor on our local control funding formula, so our base allocation that all school districts are funded on. And so that was the initial stages of the crisis post-pandemic, and the state at the same time trying to figure out, along with the federal government, how are we going to be able to support our schools? We being school districts, communicating to our legislative bodies, which during that time, the expectation that school districts continue to support students, not only with food, that was a significant issue, how many different families and children would not have food during the period of time that school would have still been open when we closed our doors in March. And so when that first round of funding came, we used it in the budget to offset potential losses while we were waiting for the state to come back with a solution, in which they did by the end of June. So by the time the beginning of the year started, we revised our budget. So then we not only had ESSER 1, which was specifically to be used for support for students. At that time, we were calling we were trying to mitigate learning loss, and that was the first term. So during this entire time, so many new terms and acronyms were also being presented to us in adaptation. And so those resources, we were able to utilize them to support, what are you going to do, district, whether it's over the summer or at the beginning of the school year, to be able to offset learning loss. What expenditures, district, did you incur for most districts, approximately March 15th through June 30th and onward? What expenses did you incur for purchasing personal protective equipment? What cleaning strategies and parameters did you add to your activities to support your facilities being clean? What support did you need an offset of expenditures to supply food to students? What other resources did you apply during that period of time to support you? So we were able to use this money to go backwards to March if necessary, but also to project forward what else we needed. What was key and what was also spent in this area was technology. We knew by the time the summer began that we were not going to be able to open school in the manner in which we knew it. We weren't clear about what it looked like or how long, but we began pivoting and purchasing technology, not only for our students, but to make sure that our staff, who was also working in a distant format for the majority, but we had a lot of team members that were still coming into the campuses and into various offices to continue the operations of the district. Our employees needed to continue to be paid. The district's invoices and our vendors needed to be paid. And so all of these operations are happening. And so another component of what we use, ESSER1, and I will now point you to the second line, our learning loss mitigation funds, which is the $33.2 million in the second row. We began to also get clarity around those resources. Now at budget adoption before June, we knew that there's some resources were coming. At that time, the clarity about how we could spend those resources and the amount that we were going to receive was not clear. So we did not actually add the $33.2 million to our budget until after we adopted the budget, and then we revised it. Those resources were also for many and all of the same things that I just shared with you, to include, are you changing, district, what roles and responsibilities your staff is doing, or are you also needing to hire additional staff to support areas of need that, had the pandemic not occurred, you would not have experienced? And so the expansion, not only on specific learning loss for our students, but also how does the district continue to support its operations and support it from a distant learning, distant working, remote working component, as well as these are the resources that we utilize to upgrade our filters in our facilities. These are the resources that we utilize to purchase, again, additional technology, not only for students and staff. These are the resources that we begin to utilize to purchase as we began turning the corner on what would reopening look like, air purifiers in our classrooms, as well as signage and other tangible as well as other infrastructure needs. The difference, if you look at the third column, which I'll point out to you, and as you go through all of these charts, there was a deadline established for all of these resources. And so when we received the notification of the Learning Loss Mitigation Fund, again, I'm in that second row, the $33.2 million, we received more clarity and notification about that allocation in approximately late August. And then we needed to provide a report, a plan for how we were going to spend those resources in September, which we did. And we had to spend all of those resources by December of 2020, which we also did. And so that was a tremendous exercise that required so many different departments from, you'll hear from Dr. Aguilera next, on the very specific strategies that we were going to deploy, in addition to what other materials and supplies, as well as we cannot do any of this work without our labor partners And so these resources were also used to ensure that we had agreements, not only in the fall, but also in the spring with our labor partners as we move to reopening. The remaining funds that we received and have currently, the first row, the learning loss mitigation funds, and specifically these resources came from the state's allocation of emergency relief funds. And then again, as you can see in the summary of allowable uses, so we've summarized it in a sentence, but each of these slides has a hot link. So where it says see details, you can click that link and then you can see the expanded list of different requirements and allowances. There you go, that these resources can be used for. So it's a really good resource for you to get familiar with how not only these funds work, but what the requirements are for use. And all of these resources have come with reporting requirements as well as assurances. So as we go back to the tab right before where you are, the golden tab with the white square rectangle in it. There you go. Okay, so as we continue to move forward, as we got closer to the end of the year, we did not during the fall have clear line of sight that any additional resources were coming to the district. And as I move forward, so we can continue to get to one of the juicier areas of not only what resources did we get, but also what are we spending it on. We received notification in December about ESSER 2, which is the 5th line down. That is the second wave of the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Act. And so that is $57.9 million. Now, these resources, if you look at the deadline, we have until September of 2023 to spend it. And so that's the plan for how we're going to spend those resources, as well as the last item on this list, the AB 86, which you'll hear more about very shortly from Dr. Aguilera. This is an additional resource that is, again, focused on in-person instruction and expanded learning. So we turned learning loss, as you saw was used earlier, into expanded learning as it relates to term use. And as you can see the summary of how Oakland's full allocation, and then based on when we reopened our schools, how much we would receive in the in-person instruction grant, which was contingent upon the date in which the district opened school. And so we lost 7 days from the maximum allocation, because the maximum allocation would have been if you opened your doors to start school with a specific profile by April 1st, you would receive your full allocation. We opened after April 1st, and it excludes spring break. So out of that allocation, we will not be earning $867,000 of that, but we did receive the majority. It was an incentive for schools to open as of April 4th, so that again, we can continue migrating into a full person learning profile in which we began a hybrid process. Next slide, please.
Okay, and
We
we just have
Oh,
a
sorry.
couple, well, we're actually over a couple minutes, but as we move to the next slide, could you also talk on a bit about how the funds are gonna be shared equitably and how it'll kind of roll down to the schools?
I'm turning the corner. It's actually really part of the second presentation Dr. Aguilera is going to do,
Oh,
but I will
okay.
definitely intro that. And so
Great, thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. And so we also wanted to just point out, these are some additional one-time resources. The very first resource we received post-pandemic was from the State General Fund, the SB 117 resources. So SB stands for Senate Bill, AB stands for Assembly Bill. And so these resources were the first resources that the district received last fall to also support school reopening plans. The American Rescue Plan, or ESSER 3, is also a resource that is coming. We'll have very similar resources as the elementary education grant funds expanded. They also begin to include language about how you should use this money to support your infrastructure. So that's an additional component. And as you again click those links to see what the uses are for, again, it is to continue to help the district with instruction, but also the environment for instruction, as well as food and meals to students, in addition to supporting labor. How we track these funds, each of these funds, as you can, if you look at the fund column, has a specific resource. How can we make sure that there are groups that have historically been underserved? This is where the plan and actually another assessment and evaluation that the district has just gone through is informing the plan of how we are reaching students that have been underserved previously and may not have had the maximum, not just access, but infrastructure and planning for their academic experience and whole child experience within the district. And so as we transition to Dr. Aguilera's presentation, you will hear more about how the equity component and the use of these resources will be realized.
Great, thank you. And I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Aguilera. I was trying to reshare my screen, but you can still see it. It's all there, right?
Yes, you can still yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Sandra, welcome. And the questions we have for you tonight is, what is the district's proposal for the 27 million expanded learning opportunities grant? Which staff hired under this grant will be central and which will be based and supervised at school sites with central coaching and training? And lastly, how can we balance the need for district-wide strategies for these funds while making sure that they are allocated at each school site in alignment with the vision of families, staff, and leadership in site level teams such as the SSC?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sandra. It's great to be here this evening. So I'll take us through a few slides talking about the Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant Plan. And I'm so excited about an opportunity for our entire district to expand and enhance all of the services that we aim to provide our students, families, and of course our staff as well. I really want to stress that we cannot pass up this opportunity to really enhance everything that's happening at our school sites. And I just haven't seen a time like this in a very long time to invest deeply in strategies that we know will help and support our students and families. So the Expanded Learning Plan is a portion of the funding that is that Chief Grant Dawson just reviewed. And we've been doing a series of engagements, myself, superintendent, board members, in events like this, and Diana Sherman, who has been instrumental in collecting information from our stakeholders. And so when we looked at all the ideas that were generated from our stakeholders, our board members, and then using two main resolutions that were passed recently, so Black reparations and mental health credit recovery, we saw these themes emerge about how to have an equitable education in our district. We cannot just reopen and say everything's back to normal, because it's not. And we need to be mindful about how we're reopening. So some emergent themes that came out was stressing a restorative start for restorative schooling, that we develop a coherent, instructionally focused system-wide plan, that we build safe, inclusive school environments. We invest deeply in literacy and other means to accelerate learning, a focus on mental health and wellness, that we listen to students. So we met with our student all-city council, and they really highlighted a few of the items, especially around mental health, attendance, and credit recovery. And additionally, investing in the relationships between students, families, with school staff. And then not missing the opportunity to build capacity of our adults to develop culturally responsive, identity safe, and affirming learning environments. So the next few slides that we'll go through will walk us through the initial draft that we have for using these funds. I won't go in, next slide, please. Oh yeah, this is the one. Okay. So I won't go into the technical pieces of this, but this essentially describes what the plan must have, how we've engaged families, students, teachers, school staff. We did have sessions for teachers and our classified staff to ensure that they had an opportunity as well to chime in on how funds should be used. A description of how we'll use assessments to identify the needs of students, how parents and guardians will access the support, how we'll provide, like specifically the supplemental instruction and support. Support is used broadly, but I'll take us through the examples of how we've defined what support looks like, the expenditure plan, and then how the plan coordinates with other funding that Chief Grant Dawson just took us through. Next slide, please. So what you have here, and this is all, I should definitely mention that this is under discussion, and the first read of this plan is going to the board on Wednesday night on May 12th. So it'll be a first read. We'll have a discussion and see if there are adjustments that we should make, and then we'll go to final adoption on May 26th. This plan, unlike our other plans, it has to be approved by June 1st. That's why it's on a slightly different timeline than our usual budget and LCAP. So what you see here in front of you are 7 different areas, and there are 13 individual investments, and the total is just over $27 million. I do have more slides that give you a summary of what these areas mean, but I'll just kind of go through them now, and maybe in the breakout groups, you can use those slides to discuss more deeply. I do want to stress that this is a slice of the funds. It's not all of the funds. So if you're wondering, like, what about this other strategy? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be brought forward. It's just not in this particular plan. It will likely be in the larger LCAP plan that we review with board engagement in June. So for these areas, the first area is extending instructional learning time. So the investment proposal is additional tutoring services through the after-school program. And it's not only in the after-school hours, it's also during the day. Many of these services are proposed to be a menu of services that schools will be able to choose from. And you'll be able to see that in the details. And then the last slide that will take us through, we'll talk about how schools will receive their allocations. So additional tutoring services, additional student days through Saturday school, and then our summer learning program, enhancing and expanding that program. The next area is accelerating progress to close learning gaps through the implementation, expansion, or enhancement of learning supports. So this is the area of case management when it comes to attendance and attendance improvement. The menu of items also encourages school sites to utilize community members or parents to be in these types of positions, but you'll see that in the details. And then attendance incentives. So we're proposing that we provide incentives to students and families for increased attendance and improvement in that area. For integrated supports, student supports to address other barriers to learning, is where we addressed or added mental health services. So school sites often have some level of mental health services, but the notion is to expand and enhance those services. And then restorative justice at school sites, especially at the secondary level, adding more elementary restorative justice practices as well, and a peer restorative justice program that already exists, but to expand that program. Community learning hubs that provide students with access to technology, internet, and other academic supports. So continuing our investment in education platforms. This is only a portion of those platforms. We invested over the last year and even previous about $400,000 worth of educational platforms. So Clever, Seesaw, etc. iReady, we'll maintain those, but this is just a slice of that. Next slide, please. Okay, and then supports for credit deficient students to complete graduation or grade promotion requirements and to increase or improve student college eligibility. It's a credit recovery plan. And this, unlike the other plans, is more of a centralized approach to credit recovery, and that we develop a cadre of teachers that are supervised centrally to provide credit recovery specifically to students that are needing more help. Largely, that responsibility has been on school sites, and we feel like we need to expand that program and not only have it on school sites, but to also do that at a central level. Additional academic services for students. So literacy improvements, TK through second grade reading tutors at school sites, and paraeducators. And paraeducators, we would be, they would assist us in helping with the behavior plan implementation. So we do some training or deeper training in that area. And then also as potential literacy, literacy educators as well. And that would be coupled with some training support. So paraeducators would know some of our literacy programs. And we see some of this work as potential pipeline work. So that way, maybe a paraeducator gets a sense of what it's like to do this, like the literacy work and some of the behavioral work. Behavioral work they already somewhat do in those classrooms. And, encourage our paraeducators that are receiving this additional training to go into the teaching field. So I think Director Davis mentioned that earlier. And then lastly, training for school staff on Tier 1 family partnership strategies. And we are proposing a parent-teacher home visit program for all of our school sites. So there's training and stipends that are available to our teachers. Next slide, please. So the services, I think I added a slide, Ms. Caitlin. Are you able to, those are the actual breakdown for each of them. I think as you were talking, I was sensing that we might need to explain how schools would get the services. I can just talk through it, but it is in the slide deck. I don't know.
Maybe if I stop sharing and then reshare,
okay,
it'll refresh. Okay, I'm gonna stop share. You keep talking though.
This is my last slide. But the slides that you were starting to show, they include a breakdown of each of the summary of what we're proposing and what the menu could look like for schools to choose. So the majority of the services are school-based. They're not meant to develop a larger central office. So that was one caveat that I had for our team as we were developing some of the plans was to focus on how to enhance and expand at the school site. The school process to access funds. So the way that we are approaching this is through looking through important data that gives us an equitable look at a school site. So the local control funding formula, unduplicated pupil percent, that's the UPP percent. It tells you how many students that you're serving at a school site that are low income, that may be language learners, that are potentially unhoused and foster youth. So that percent is where we will start. We'll also add in local reading measures because it'll give you a sense of how students are doing academically. We are also using the previous scores for Smarter Balance, which is the standardized test, so SBAC, to help us see what it looked like prior to the pandemic. We haven't been taking those exams for the last 2 years, but that's still relevant data. Especially for high schools, looking at their graduation rates, their A to G completion, and then of course, chronic absenteeism, especially when it comes to the attendance work. So the notion is to look at the existing SPSAs that school sites have created, and they've done that with their school site councils. There was an additional step that I had added to the SPSAs. And I know at the time school sites were like, what is the multi-tiered systems of support plan and why do we need to do this? It was really meant for school sites to have that lens of what are you doing for all students? What are you doing for students that may need a little bit more support? And then what's your highest level of support for students that need the most support? And we want to look at those plans and see with the school leader where there are some potential gaps. And that would be the location where we help the school site and plug into those gaps. So it's not that every school site will get the same amount. We are very knowledgeable about school sites need different supports. Some may need more than others. And that's why we're using those different metrics to evaluate and do so equitably. And really the notion is to expand and enhance because it is one-time funding. We don't know and we don't suspect that this will be long-term. And so we have to be mindful that it's about intense support as students are coming back, but then we are going to need to taper off that investment because we won't have that those funds long term. And then, as I said, I did include more of the breakdown for the possible items that schools could choose from for each of those areas. Yes, in the subsequent slide. So that's probably more appropriate for a small group. But that's where we're at so far in the Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant. And again, we'll be going through this at the board meeting and collecting more feedback then.
Thank you. Couple things. First, can someone on here put the link to the slides into the chat? So there's someone asking for that, and then that way we can see the have the slides. And then there was also a question about, is there going to be any more teacher or staff engagements coming up? I do know there's a parent-student advisory committee meeting on May 19th coming up, but any specific for teachers or staff?
We can add more. We did 2 weeks of engagements, but happy to add more. There's also, we had a specific form that people at any time could fill out. It's very simple in terms of it's a paragraph that people could just write in to say that these are my ideas. And then I know, Ms. Caitlin, you were on the PSAC meeting last night, but that is what generated the lists and lists. We have a couple hundred ideas that we shared with PSAC last night, and the senior leadership team is also going through to see. But I'm happy to add more sessions into next week, but the timing is getting to be tight, but we can add more sessions next week if that is desired.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our time got a little messed up. So I think we're probably going to go to 7:15 tonight if folks can stay in. And Sam, do you feel like we're ready to move into the breakout groups or?
Yeah, that would be great. I think we have a lot of folks, so we'll have 7 or 8 breakout groups, and I will put the link to the note-taking doc into the chat.
Great. Okay, so we're going to move into breakout groups. I think Katie is behind the scenes doing some magic to make that happen. And so we'll move into these groups. They're going to be random. Introduce yourself. And we'll be talking about, as we heard, there are over $200 million in relief funds to be obligated over the next 3 years. What do you think should be the district's priorities for these resources? And what academic and social supports do you think students will need next year to be successful? Each group does already have a facilitator and note taker assigned, and then we'll return for report backs. The breakout groups won't be recorded. And so please use the note-taking doc. And I know I've been looking at this question with the Parent-Student Advisory Committee over the last month, and it can feel pretty overwhelming, like $200 million. So there are lists, and maybe I can share that has come up, and it can help to kind of give you some perspective, but also using the slides that Sandra shared to kind of give you some ideas there about maybe where the priorities should be, and thinking both kind of district-wide and then how it presents at your own school. Okay, let's
So
see.
thanks, everybody. I'm gonna send you all into breakout rooms. I just wanted to give you a heads up that there are folks that are coming in right now as we're speaking, and there are also some folks who are named with, like, multiple people have the same link. So I'll be sending folks into their rooms, and there'll be some people that'll be popping in a little bit later as I assign them. So just as an FYI, a heads up for everyone. And you'll see something come up on your screen that says to say yes to whichever breakout room you're going into, and you just need to click on that. Sam, how long are folks going to be in the breakouts?
Let's go for 18 minutes, and then we'll come back and debrief.
Awesome. Okay. See you all soon. Have fun.
Great. I think people are coming in. Okay, I think this is our group. Maybe we can go around and just introduce each other, and then we'll get into the discussion. So I'm Sam Davis. I'm the director for District 1, and I also have a son in 9th grade at Oakland Tech.
Ok, no sé si me están escuchando.
Sí.
Ok. Que no, nada más quería saber porque no sabía si estaba en el modo de traductor o de participante.
Sí, yo creo que María, estás con nosotros, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Hola María, un gusto verla o escucharla. Entonces lo vamos a hacer en los dos idiomas, so it might be a little back and forth, English and Spanish.
Sure, no problem. Yes, absolutely.
Because we can't do.
Oh, nice to see all the faces. I will go ahead and share my screen again.
Yes, let me remind the families to go back to Spanish. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Entonces, las personas que estaban escuchando en español, ahorita ya les volvió a aparecer en su pantalla. Escojan español, ahí me escuchan. Confírmenme en el chat si me están escuchando cuando empecemos. Thank you for that.
Thank you,
Andres. And I know we want to get to the report backs, but we do have a quick announcement from Mr. Luna, who's a commissioner with the redistricting Commission of Oakland, just to let us know about the redistricting process. So I'm just going to invite him to unmute and speak.
Pueda hablar aquí con nosotros. Gracias por eso, gracias. Voy a pasar el micrófono. Mi nombre, trabajo.
I'm assisting the redistricting commission, but Commissioner Stevens I did see is here.
Yes. So thank you, Richard, and thanks Sam and Aimee for the opportunity to share an introduction to Oakland's redistricting process. My name is Jan Stevens. I'm a 30-year plus resident of District 1 and a commissioner on the new Oakland City Redistricting Commission. And as you just heard, attending with me is Richard Luna from the City Manager's Office. So this commission was formed in 2020, last year, to draw new boundaries for the city's council and school board districts that would be consistent with 2020 census data and the federal and state voting rights legislation. Who we are, we're a team of 15 members, 13 voting and 2 alternates. We were chosen by an independent panel from a pool of 130 applicants who responded to public postings about the commission. We are representative of the city with diverse backgrounds in a lot of areas. By residents, we have members from every district, by ethnicity, income, age, education, and work experience. So you probably know redistricting happens every 10 years following the federal census. But what's new and I think really significant for Oakland this decade is the shift from a process with priorities that were set by existing city council members to one which is led by a volunteer commission as the decision maker with priorities that are set in the city charter. In fact, this commission is specifically prohibited from considering how changes in boundary lines might affect existing incumbents and candidates. So that's really quite a different approach. Our priorities are therefore in large part mandated. Legal compliance requires that the resulting districts be roughly of equal population, that they be geographically contiguous and compact, that they are drawn with consideration of communities of interest, and that they're defined, as I said before, with no influence from or concern for existing office holders or candidates. And then as a group, other priorities as we've worked together as a team have evolved, and those include public involvement. We're very committed to that. We're working very hard to set up effective and inclusive outreach. We want to leverage community-based organizations so that we can reach out into the city as far as we can. Obviously, 15 of us can't communicate directly with every resident of the city, so we want to use some of the existing organizations to do that. So where we are now is not where we thought we would be, because at this point we had expected that the census data would be available. We'd be drawing maps and talking with the public. But as you probably know, like many things this year, that whole process has been delayed. So instead of having data in the spring, as we expected, it's going to be at best late summer before we can actually start working with the real data. So in the meantime, we've put an emphasis on planning for the kind of community involvement that I mentioned. We're getting materials ready. We're collecting meeting schedules for groups like this, identifying key contact groups so that, as they say, we can kind of hit the road running when we finally get the data. So with this compressed schedule, you can see we're going to have a lot to do in a very short period of time. And I know that the school district, the school board, and all of you have been incredibly challenged this past year and focused on safe school openings. But I'm still going to ask for your help. So here are the kinds of things you can do. We have a website. It's at oaklandca.gov/redistricting. I think you can find just about anything any question you might have answered there. And most importantly, probably, that's where you can register so that you'll receive news and updates on our activities. You can attend commission meetings if you don't have enough meetings to attend already. The second Wednesday of every month, 5 o'clock, there's an agenda published the Friday before, so you can attend and listen, or you can attend and comment on agenda items, or just in general if you like. You can also submit written comments if you have ideas about things we should consider or information you'd like us to have. You can send that to us. Basically, we want your help, both as members of this sort of interested group and as individuals, to get the word out, because we want Oakland residents to feel represented. And we want all groups to feel that they have access to political power through elected city officials from fairly drawn districts. And the only way that's going to happen is through participation by all the diverse communities that make up this city that we all care so much about. So that's the overview of the background, kind of where we are and where we're headed. Perhaps in 2 or 3 months, I might be invited back and we can talk about more specifics at that time. But thanks again. I know you guys are really busy, so thank you for your time and for your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. And yeah, I think, we're running a little late. Otherwise, I would say let's discuss this, but I know people really want to have a little bit of a chance for Q&A. So I know we're at time for the meeting, but I hope we can take 15 more minutes of everyone's time and just get some very brief report backs from the small groups. And then if people have questions, that would also be welcome. You can put them in the chat. So I know for my small group, we had a really great group, a lot of individuals who are both teachers and parents, or have been in the district for a long time. And what we heard was, and so if each group can just report back maybe 1 minute each, and then we can go on to questions. So what we heard was just a lot of people raising the issue of mental health, and also the opportunity of using art as a way to address students' mental health needs, because it's a great way to express yourself. And then a lot of people raised paraeducators and using them to do some of these parent-family home visits, or also to do the tutoring, because they also are already part of the community and they could use the extra hours and really leverage their connection to the community already. And so that was my small group. And I don't know if group number 2, I think the note taker was Sydney, if you're still on.
Yes, I took some notes, and again, similar to you, mental health supports were a huge piece of our conversation, just like how important it's going to be to get trained folks in our school sites, but also to train our teachers so that we are ready to tackle whatever may come our way next year. One important and interesting piece that also came up was this idea of, building capacity so that teachers and staff aren't the only ones who are trained in these practices. And so building that out is another area that we had a pretty great conversation around. And over at Tech, there was some conversation around creating like a hangout space that's not owned by a teacher, but is just kind of more of a student-centered space for kids to be. And this notion of, hiring one-time people may not be, ideal, but if we do hire, one-time coaches, the idea is that they're going to be coaching people for a short period of time, and then that person will have learned from the coach. And so really actually thinking critically around, could we hire some extra people who, we may not be able to keep them on long-term, but we could learn a lot from them while we have the funds to, pay for them.
Thank you so much. And then I think the next group was Rachel's.
Yeah, so also a lot of talk about mental health and student supports. A couple of just the things that specifically we talked about. One was we talked about not only needing to increase the capacity for wraparound services, but also teachers, and making sure that we have kind of thought through the steps. So for example, if teachers are going to need kind of robust support, not just on their increased, kind of need for kids with, their kind of increased kids who they'll be kind of getting caught up, but also just the amount of extra like work and time management. The other thing was also around thinking through the capacity in the community, because often our students are getting referred to outside services, but will there be enough capacity to accept those services, and have we thought through that? We talked about there was one idea to just pay off our state loans so that we're not under receivership, which is something I hadn't heard before, and certainly a creative idea. And then I think the other thing that came up was that I think everybody knows that the learning gaps have existed pre-pandemic in our district, and there is and so this of course exacerbated some students who had already not been served well in our schools. And so thinking through maybe not just doing the same things over again, but thinking about actually having this is a chance to sort of be transformative. So, so there's more notes, but that's kind of what I wanted to, I think would be helpful to share.
Thank you, Rachel. I think the next group was Director Ames.
Great, happy to on behalf of our group. We also had a really great group of both parents and teachers. Some of the themes that came up was the need for literacy support, just the need for more, especially in mixed income schools that might not have discretionary budgets for community school managers, the need for that support for family liaisons, community school connectors, to help support those types of outreach. Also, translation support came up. That was a huge need this year, lack of challenges with getting, especially if it was a short turnaround, getting translation staffing support. There seemed to be a shortage district-wide. Also, just recognition that there were needs that were in place even before COVID. So there was challenges with cleaning and the shortage of custodians and just the impact of our previous budget cuts on school communities. So for example, enrichment activities and other types of activities that help enhance learning. So if there's a way to help restore some of those opportunities, that would be helpful. Teacher retention came up as a theme. Our teachers, as we have said, have been just dealing with very challenging, not only this year with all of the shifts going on, but even the workload even before COVID. So anything we can be doing around helping to support teachers, particularly next year. There was a concern at the secondary level around tutoring, and I thought this was interesting, that tutoring after school and during weekends, getting students to actually, especially those who needed that type of support to show up after hours was difficult, has always been difficult. So if there's a ways that we could help support in schools, staff support that could be providing extra tutoring and extra student supports during the school day, that could be helpful so that it does not rely on students to have to come after school. That had come up, and just really doubling down on investments that we already know are effective. Small class sizes, relationship cultures, investing in teachers and programs that we know that work, and continuing to support and build those up. More themes that came up during our breakout group. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ang. And then I think group 5 was Ms. Aguilera's. Do you want to report back, or should Yao?
I'm happy to as well. Okay, so what I heard is the need for emotional and mental health support, and art therapy came up in this space too, which I love as well. A notion of doing a welcome week for school sites and having group circles in place. More staff in the younger grades for 3rd through 5th grade. That seemed to be like more hands-on in that setting, because the class sizes in 3rd through 5th tend to be larger. Enjoying that we're focusing in on credit recovery. Brandon had the idea of bridge support for sixth graders as they're coming in from the lower grades to 9th grade, and a specific training for that people have access to specific training as they're coming into our school sites on what look fors, so patterns in behavior and potential isolation, and that we're asking the right questions of students. More CSM, so community school managers, and knowing how to connect to students that need additional support. So that's what I gathered from the conversation. And Yael, if I didn't say everything, you want to add anything, please do.
I think you got it. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And then I don't know if Andre or Lisa wants to report on the last group.
I'll try it. Can you hear me?
Go for it.
Okay. So I was in a group and we were lovingly called Lisa Grant Dawson's group. And so we said that we should spend the money in terms of the allocation with the student who needs it the most, right? So looking at an equity approach, particularly schools that can't recover from the pandemic, and then also looking at schools that do not have a PTA to support them. So ensuring that we reach out to those schools to provide those support. We said there should be dedicated resources to support multi-stakeholder holder teams at the school site so they can build their muscle and capacity to do planning and thinking about how to spend the money in a way that has the greatest impact. Some of the things in terms of additional spending was professional development, not only with teachers, but also thinking about how to use parents and doing outreach to other parents in a one-on-one relational way and stipend them in some way. So we do economic development and we build the relationships. And then building on the things that work already with school sites, with teachers who are building out their approach with library expansion and things of that nature. So I copied it and put it in the chat to Ms. Lisa Grant Dawson, but you also have it in that Google Doc. So those are some of the things that came up.
Thank you so much, Andre. And I think we do still have a few minutes for questions. We're going to end at 7:15, but I do see a question in the chat about how principals are involved in determining the priorities. Sandra, did you want to address that?
Yes, I was just writing a response to in the chat. So we will use the school site plan review process to enhance what our school sites are planning. So principals will be able to revise their budgets. And it's important to note that all the funds that we're talking about and the adoption process is not yet done. That doesn't happen until June. And that, you know, besides this plan being approved by June, but then the LCAP and the overall district budget isn't approved until the June 30th timeline. So we still have to go through the approval process before we're allocating funds. I do know that this will be a discussion item on Wednesday because it's really hard for schools to turn around and implement and start hiring if we're waiting until June. So I know that this will be discussed, but they definitely have time to revise. It's not yet set in terms of like, this is the district budget, but the areas are what we're trying to get clear in terms of investment. So I hope that helps answer the question, but there's still revising that can happen. We will be meeting one-to-one with our principals so they can adjust their plans. And yes.
Thank you so much. Erica, I see your hand up.
Hey, neighbors. My name is Enrico Bachicha. I'm a math teacher at Oakland Tech. Shout out District 1. I live in District 3. I was born in District 5. So, you know, I'm really from Oakland. My question is, I'm hearing, I'm not sure how if this was going to happen, but I'm hearing there might be this online option for students to opt into for next year. And if that's the case, it kind of, I don't know, but I'm hearing rumblings of that. And also with that, I imagine if with that, students will have to unenroll from their school and kind of join this online school. And that sounds like logically that would affect ADA for schools. And that seems like something, a significant loss of money that this would probably be a good idea to use to replace if that is the case. So I don't know if that's really happening or what's going on. I'm hearing things, if anyone wants to address that, but that's where this could be used also.
Director Davis, I'm happy to speak to that if you'd like me to. Or,
yeah, please do. Go for it.
So yes, we are currently surveying families through the intent to return process to identify if that is an option that families want for distance learning. We don't yet know from the state if that will be something we're required to do, but we want to still offer that as a possibility. And it will be likely in a pathway approach, so connected to an existing program. So far, looking at the data even today, we don't have high interest in a distance learning option. And when we looked at, is there any concentration of families? We have about 7,000 respondents so far. It's not enough to say that this is what it's looking like, but there were about 200 families that wanted a distance learning option. However, there's no specific concentration at any school site. So we were looking, to your point on the impact of a school site, we're seeing like 4 in 5 at school sites so far, but we'll keep the public and community updated on that. And the results we'll produce next week, May 14th is the end. So if you haven't filled out your form, please do so we know. We're just trying to do as much planning as we can with the information that's coming in.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's any final burning questions, we have about 1 minute. Otherwise, you could feel free to put questions in the chat that we can follow up on. Oh, on Mr. Spearman, I see your hand.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So in our chat, there was someone who came a little bit later and they had questions, and I think I would be remiss to put their question out there. So the question, Dr. Aguilera, was in terms of the allocation of the funding, I think you spoke briefly about using current equity formula under the LCFF and then using reading levels. If you could quickly share how the additional funding would be allocated using the formula, I think that may answer the question that was raised in the chat from one of our participants.
So as an example for the attendance improvement, we'll use the chronic absenteeism rates at school sites to judge which school sites should have additional support. Not all schools will get the same level of support when it comes to chronic absenteeism. So knowing the results already, a heavy investment in high school will likely be what we do for chronic absenteeism, because that's where we see the most need. So that's an example. For our literacy improvements, I didn't mention, and not in this particular plan, but there are plans to do secondary investments as well, but using the literacy rates that we do local measures on judging, the type of literacy support that a school site needs. So it may be a teacher, it may be an instructional support specialist, it may be a paraeducator. There are different levels that we can adjust depending on the need. So it's not going to be a per pupil allocation. We really are trying to look at the existing services at the school site, see what we can enhance. And there is a possibility, as an example, if a school site has invested in a community school manager, we could adjust the funding source to then help them free up other funds to use more site-based. So it is using multiple metrics depending on the area. And for mental health and the community positions, it will be all of those together. So I hope that helps.
Okay, Sam, you have one last question?
Yeah, and this is for Lisa, just real quick. For Sandra, that I got a chat from a teacher asking how will teachers be able to be involved in the decision-making in the next few weeks, knowing that they were all kind of overwhelmed with going back to school in recent time. And so now is probably a better time to engage teachers on this question.
So we're sending out, I'll make sure that we send out the information again for more teachers to say how they would, suggest or collect their ideas. Additionally, we're meeting still with the principals to give them the details and to see what they think, to collect their feedback. So we'll provide our principals the ability to take this back to their school sites. I do think, I know that time is getting close and we're counting down the weeks that we have left, but we'll provide some of our resources to school sites so they can engage in this conversation. Most of our school sites have been discussing with their leadership teams, faculty councils. So I not knowing the structure at each school site, I can definitely, provide more resources to our principals to engage in this conversation. But it's also posted on our website, on the LCAP page to collect more ideas. So it is possible that individual teachers can share their ideas. And I'm happy if somebody wants to email me if they want more details. I'm happy to send those that information on as well.
Great, thank you so much. And I know we're at time, way over time, so I just want to appreciate everybody for participating. Thank Caitlin Kersheed one more time for being a wonderful MC for this evening. And just celebrate you all and celebrate all the teachers in Teacher Appreciation Week. And Director Ng, I don't know if you had any last words you wanted to say, or should we just let everybody go?
Oh, actually, one quick thing is that next Thursday, I'm looking up the date for just in terms of additional opportunities to be able to provide input in May. Well, the draft is going to the board on the 12th for discussion. So that is another opportunity, but also at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, we will also have more time to discuss. Those committee meetings tend to be smaller, so there's more time for public comment. So that's May 13th, Thursday, May 13th at 6 p.m. If you would like to provide more feedback around what you see in terms of the draft plan, that is another opportunity. Also, thank you, Angelica. There is another Parent-Student Advisory Committee meeting, which will be happening May 19th around the Local Controller Accountability Plan, which is our budget that has a little bit longer of a timeline. So that's due June 30th. So those are additional opportunities to be able to engage and provide feedback.
Great, well, thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Aguilera. Thank you, Ms. Grant Dawson. Thank you, Ms. Hassan, for joining us. And I wish you all a great evening. And yeah, it's let's look forward to next year in person full time and getting to really come back in a restorative way to schools for just letting students experience the joy of school once again. It's really been exciting to see that happening, and we can look forward to a lot more of it next year. And with that, I will wish you all good night.
Director Davis, could you leave it open for a while so people can copy the stuff that was in the chat? There were some resources there. So could you leave it open for like 5 minutes?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
I will save the chat too.
Thank you.
Is Sandra, could you link the, you said it's on the website, a place that we're getting input?
I put it in the chat too. I just pulled it up to send to one of the teachers that was private chatting me. So let me put the form in the chat. So, and we're collecting until about June, because as you know, we'll have to bring it all together for the LCAP.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay,
Yeah,
there's the form that people can use to submit more ideas.
Thank you so much.